Good evening. Thanks for coming to my lecture recital. Today I'm going to present on the English guitarist, composer, teacher, and writer John Duart and his English Suite Opus 31. Through this presentation, I will discuss the life of Duart and his incorporation of the folk songs within sections of the English Suite. John William Duart was born in Sheffield, England on October 2nd, 1919, and died at the age of 85 on December 23rd, 2004. Although he was born in Sheffield, he lived in Manchester, England from the age of 6. His mother was an English woman born in Philadelphia, and his father was Scottish. Duart's pride in his English heritage is projected in his music. He used English folk songs in many of his pieces, including the English Suite. And he also published a collection of 16 English folk songs that he arranged for solo guitar. Despite his later musical achievements, Duart had little background in music. Early on, he had access to a banjo, which was popular in England, and as a teenager, he taught himself the basics of ukulele. He studied jazz guitar formally with Terence Usher towards the end of high school from 1934 to 1936. During these lessons, Usher taught Duart how to read and write music, and also how to improvise. Duart later said that learning how to improvise helped him a lot as a musician, and it became a part of his composition process. Duart and Usher's friendship over these 2 years would prove to be a consistent thread throughout Duart's musical career. Though Duart studied guitar on and off for 2 years, he decided to pursue his childhood dream and get a degree in science. So from 1936 to 1940, he studied chemistry at Manchester University Faculty of Technology. He earned his degree with honors, and after graduation, he worked as a chief chemist in a plastic factory. And it was here that he met his future wife, Dorothy Seddon, and he would continue working as a professional chemist until 1969. So in the time Duart spent as a chemist, he was still active in the music scene. He played many genres of music, but worked regularly as a jazz musician. He expanded his knowledge by learning the trumpet and double bass, and this diverse skill set allowed him to participate in the various ensembles that performed around Manchester. He publicly performed a trumpet concerto, and he also played double bass in sessions with Django Reinhardt and Coleman Hawkins. Duart met his jazz idol, Wes Montgomery, in a club in 1964, and he was inspired by Montgomery's melodic lines and his understanding of harmony. This jazz influence can be heard throughout many of Duart's compositions. Although music was a major part of Duart's development as a young man, it wouldn't be until some years later that this hobby would become a career. So up to the 20th century in Europe, the history of the guitar has been characterized by periods of great popularity, followed by even more extensive periods where it was unpopular. For an example, for a brief time in the English courts of the mid-18th century, guitar became a dominant instrument. The nobility and upper class enjoyed this for a short period of time before it eventually died out and people went back to the harpsichord. And this would happen again and again throughout history. And the evolution of guitar throughout the years and its increasing popularity eventually led to many majors attempting to write for it. Also in England, in the late 19th century, folk song collecting started to gather momentum. You had composers like Ralph Vaughan Williams and Gustav Holst, who spent the early part of their career trying to develop a national English style. And this was done in many ways, including assimilating music of Richard Wagner and Edward Elgar, and also collecting folk songs around England. So it's only natural that Duart, growing up during this time, would follow suit in a way. And although he didn't collect folk songs, he incorporated many of them into his compositions. Besides the popularity of jazz around England, during Duart's time, major classical guitarists came out of England or traveled through England, such as Julian Bream, Andrei Segovia, and John Williams, but we'll talk more about them in a bit. So in the 1940s, Duart wrote for Banjo, Mandolin, Guitar magazine. He wrote 3 columns. The first was Melody and Harmony for the Guitarist. This is where you just talk about composing for the guitar. And the second was Electric Plectrum Guitar, where he talked about jazz technique and interviewed jazz musicians around England. And it was under, the last column was under a pseudonym of Discus, where he would review records. You can see here that he was featured on the cover of the June 1948 issue. And about a year after he appeared on the cover, he published a piece titled Epitaph for Emmanuel Ponce Part 2 in the New York Guitar Review. The first part was written by his former teacher, Terence Usher. Duart also wrote in a publication called The Modern Guitarist, and this was a magazine organized by Len Williams. It was eventually renamed Fretted Harmony because it failed to sell enough copies under its original name. Duart's participation in these magazines gained him a reputation in the guitar world and brought him into the view of prolific guitarists at the time. Andreas Segovia is one of these. Segovia helped to elevate the classical guitar, aiding in its acceptance as a serious performance instrument. And Duart met Segovia in 1947, and they formed a friendship that would last 39 years. So just before this, in 1946, Usher and Duart formed the Manchester Guitar Circle. And this was a society that promoted classical guitar around Manchester. And they had monthly gatherings that were known as Players' Night. And it was through one of these gatherings that they heard Segovia would be passing through. So over the next 6 years, Duart would meet Segovia 3 times. And each time he would show Segovia some of his compositions and attempt to get him to play them. It was during their 3rd meeting in 1951 that Duart showed Segovia a small prelude that he wrote. Segovia told Duart that if he wrote 2 more movements, he would play it. But Duart felt that the piece was complete and didn't want any expansion that he made to feel artificial. So he never composed a piece at that moment, but he did later. In the early 1950s, Duart met Len Williams, who was an established teacher of the guitar and father of John Williams. And it was there that Len Williams, who was returning from Australia to seek to widen his son's musical education, convinced Duart to leave his career in chemistry and move to London. Duart taught at the Spanish Guitar Center founded by Len Williams, and while there he left a strong impression on John Williams. John Williams later recognized Duart's impact on his career by including some of his transcriptions and compositions on his first recording. Duart's idea of the guitar's capabilities expanded when he met Ida Presti, who was one of the great guitarists of Duart's time. He explored these new ideas in variations on a French nursery song, which Duart wrote for Presti and her husband. Presti died at the age of 42, however, and the duo never got to record the piece. Duart composed over 130 pieces for the lute and guitar. Many of these pieces were commissioned with funds given by the Arts Council of Great Britain and other sources both domestic and foreign. Much of his commissioned pieces were written with the performers in mind, including their nationality. As such, his works show a wide range of styles, including aleatory and atonal works. So although Duart wasn't an official instructor in an English music school, he led a summer school in Somerset. The school was successful enough that he was invited to teach overseas. He worked as a teacher, lecturer, and judge in 29 different countries apart from the UK. He wrote books on guitar technique, and he also wrote a large number of articles on the subject throughout his life. Many of these articles appeared in magazines like Soundboard, Classical Guitar, and Music Teacher. He also made contributions to magazines like Music and Musician, Music and Education, and Guitar International, just to name a few. He wrote liner notes for numerous records, including the reissue of Julian Bream's RCA. And among his contributions to these magazines were a number of interviews These were published by a wide variety of journals and periodicals. Duart spoke to renowned guitarists such as Julian Bream and David Starobin. And he also spoke with other composers, conductors, pianists, and harpsichordists, just to name a few. So as you can see, Duart was involved in many aspects of the guitar community, and this included festivals. He directed a large number of these, such as the Bath International Guitar Festival, the Oak Ridge International Guitar Summer School and Festival, and the Cannington International Guitar Summer School and Festival. The Cannington Summer School and Festival was perhaps Duart's most celebrated didactic achievement. It was an annual week-long gathering in a college in southwest England, and it was built on a format that was up and coming at the time and still used today. Duart won a Grammy for his annotations on the reissue of Segovia's 1927 to 1939 recordings. He received 2 more awards, one from the Czech Ambassador of London for his services to Anglo-Czech and Slovak cultural relations, and another in 1999 from the Guitar Foundation of America, and this was the Award for Lifetime Achievement. Duart's influenced the development of the guitar repertoire. Noted for his transcriptions of Bach's cello suites, he also contributed a large number of original pieces, including the English Suite Opus 31. So Duart wrote the English Suite as a wedding present for Segovia, and within the same year, Segovia recorded it. Duart composed the English Suite in a way that alternates original material with folk songs. And by starting and ending this piece with original material, Duart creates a frame that surrounds the piece. And within these original sections, you can hear Duart's jazz influences appear through the use of chordal extensions. The remaining sections are composed of 3 folk songs, and these folk songs go by many names, and some have origins that trace back to the mid-1600s. Duart focused on one folk song in each movement, the first of which is Low Down in the Broom. I'm going to give a quick summary of Duart's material in the prelude before we move on to the folk song. So the prelude of the English Suite starts in E major, and it's characterized by these descending B octaves that I have circled up there. The theme is established in the first few measures, and it sets the tone for the outer sections of the prelude. That being said, the prelude is in ternary form, with the A material also returning in the coda. And you can see the jazz influences, especially in the last few measures of the prelude, where Duart adds extensions and borrowed chords to the progression. The borrowed chords come from the parallel minor, helping to tie the sections together, but also create tension towards the end. And Duart uses the 5 with the flat 5 in the second to last measure, and there's an interval of a tritone within that chord between the root and fifth. This creates tension, and Duart adds to that by putting a fermata over it, holding that dissonance until we finally reach tonic. The middle section of the prelude contains a folk song, Low Down in the Broom. So W.P. Merrick collected this song from Henry Hills of Lodsworth, Sussex, and the song was printed in the Journal of the Folk Song Society in 1901. As you can see, the melody is pretty straightforward and stays within an octave range. I'm going to play the first few phrases so you can have reference when I show you Duart's version. So Duart uses the folk song in the B section to contrast the A section. This section is slower and has a completely different feel than the previous one. Duart uses the Dorian mode with the raised sixth to give the minor section a certain brightness. The descending octaves that characterize the A theme are replaced by the ascending line of the folk song. I'm going to play a few measures of Duart's version where the folk song comes in. So Duart kept the folk song pretty much the same. He changed the note values but kept the same ratio in most places. The first blue circle that I have marked up there is a rhythm change. In the second one, the rhythm stays the same, he just omitted a neighbor tone that was in the original. And Duart also repeats the third phrase, and on the repeat, he changes the rhythm to match Low Down in the Broom. So the second movement of the English suite is titled Folk Song, and the folk song material comprises the majority of this movement. So the second of the three folk songs is the Cuckoo. The earliest broadside to publish this song was printed between 1780 and 1812 CE. And there are 149 collected versions, many of which depict the cuckoo as cheerful or happy. And in many versions, it is singing. I'm going to play a few measures for you for reference. So whereas Low Down in the Broom appears in the center of the English suite's prelude, or English suite, the prelude, whereas Low Down in the Broom appears in the center of the prelude, the Cuckoo folk song melody appears at the beginning and ending of the second movement. This movement is in the key of A minor, which contrasts the prelude, and that starts in E major. And this movement also has an introductory phrase that sets the tone. The reoccurring dotted 8th, 16th note rhythm of the Cuckoo melody contrasts the middle section. And I'm going to give you a brief description of Duart's material in the B section. So the middle section of Duart's original contains Duart's original material. It uses sequences like small fragments of the circle for fifths progression to transition through different key areas. Right before this section, he tonicizes B with a 5-4-3 of 5 before moving to the next section that is in D major, which is a mediant relationship with B. Duart has this 2-5-7 figure leading to a sequence that ascends by a minor third. And he repeats this moving through B and E flat before transitioning back to the folk song material. Duart builds tension and instability moving through different tonal areas. This creates a strong impact when we finally arrive back to the home key of A minor. It brings with it a sense of stability and familiarity. I'm going to play a few measures now where the folk song starts for comparison. So this folk song, there we go. This folk song, Duarte changed the least. He did keep the same rhythms, except for the two blue circles that he changed up there. So the third of the folk songs is the Ballad of Robin Hood, which was taken from The Jovial Crew, which was a Carolina-era stage play that was first published in 1652. And the comedy was written by dramatist Richard Brome. The folk song also goes by many names, a few of which are Robin Hood and the Stranger, Arthur Bland, and Robin Hood and the Tanner. The music that these folk songs are sung to also changed depending on the version. Dr. Reinhold found a similar version to this one and said it was sung to the music of In Summertime. The earliest remaining copies of the ballad are from the 18th century. And although earlier prints, which probably came from earlier materials themselves, have other names, this version is a later print titled Arthur Bland. I'm going to play a few measures for reference. So this folk song is a strong contrast to the material in Duarte's last movement titled Round Dance. Duarte's original material opens and closes this movement paralleling the prelude. This movement also begins in the key B major and transitions to the parallel minor in the middle section, again paralleling the prelude. Duarte also never uses major 5 in the E major sections. He borrows the minor from the parallel minor. This lessens the pull to tonic because the leading tone is lowered. Instead of acting as a dominant, Duarte is using the 5 to maintain an established Mixolydian mode. This movement is upbeat and has a joyful, fun character with a quarter-eighth rhythm. I will play a bit of this for you. So this folk song, Duarte changed the most. He moved the first phrase, or the second phrase, up an octave. And the first blue circle indicates an added note that mirrors the pickup of the first phrase. The purple indicates a repeated, or a fragment, which Duarte uses in the third phrase. He uses a fragment of the second phrase, which is purple, and the light blue is a fragment of the last phrase to create that third phrase. When Duarte brings that fragment of the second phrase, which is purple, he puts it in a lower voice instead of keeping it in upper. And in the last phrase, Duarte moved the melody note that's in blue to the middle voice, and he kept the B in the top. He added a pickup note also to parallel the first phrase, and he changed the rhythms that are highlighted in light green. Duarte also changed the last beat to create a transition back to his original material. So, as you can see, alternation is a theme throughout the English suite. The keys of the suite alternate between major and minor, and this echoes the format Duarte used to incorporate the folk songs within his original composition. I'm going to now play the suite for you, so be sure to listen for the folk songs when they come in. you guys for coming.